much different than the weather in Southern California.
Well, I'm excited to talk about Q today and some of the research that we uncovered.
So, if you're just joining, Amanda and I are going to talk about a year after the 2020 election and basically what has happened since, including the insurrection January 6th at the Capitol. And so Amanda really, she truly dove into the rabbit holes of QAnon. Say she's probably the courthouse news expert on QAnon now, and so she has some great insight based on her conversations with national experts on social media and cults and disinformation and how all of this has plagued our political system, preceding the 2020 election and of course through this year. So it's the 1 year anniversary, of the 2020.
Feels like 20 years.
Yeah, I think we could all agree on that. It's the 1 year anniversary of the 2020 election where Joe Biden was elected. But some of the Trump supporters who didn't accept last year's election results, many of them are followers of this conspiracy theory that spread in the year after Trump was elected that's called QAnon. And they called last year's election results the Great Steal. They stormed the Capitol January 6th. And now hundreds of them are facing criminal charges related to that insurrection. So in the year, that's why it feels like 20 years, right? In the years since Trump lost, how have followers of QAnon continued to show up in our political discourse?
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. And I did want to say that I'm flattered to be called the QAnon expert. I am absolutely not necessarily an expert, but my approach to this was to talk to as many people, read as many books, download as many different apps as I could to just try to get a pulse on what QAnon is and understand how it's been so magnetic over this year, last couple of years, and pulling people in. So Donald Trump lost election last year. QAnon is a group of people who came off of a message board, really gathered together on belief that Donald Trump could save the country. How much you want to read into save, there's a lot of to be analyzed there, but that he was going to save the country. And therefore, last year, the presidential election results were earth-shattering, that if you believe this person is going to save the country and he lost, what do you do with that? It turns out QAnon doesn't really need Donald Trump to lead it. There's it's also questionable whether Donald Trump's active involvement in QAnon, whether it was a fan fiction situation or if he was actively feeding into the group. That is an unanswered question. But there's a poll from the Public Policy Institute that estimates 15% of Americans agree with the core beliefs of QAnon. And that's the government, the media, the financial worlds in the U.S. are controlled by a group of Satan-worshipping pedophiles who run a global child sex trafficking operation. That's a direct quote of what was posed to respondents to the poll. And people said, yes, I believe that is true.
Well, that's kind of a good segue to talk about how this is still playing out today, right? Just yesterday, those of us who are Twitter users probably saw this group of people that gathered in Dallas because they believed that JFK Jr. was going to return and that he was going to reinstate Trump as president, or I think it was leader of leaders, may have been the phrase that I saw some of the QAnon supporters called it. And this is a real thing that happened yesterday. Hundreds of people, many from out of state, went to Dallas because they believed that a person who died decades ago was going to return. And so, as ridiculous as that sounds, that's the reality that we're facing when it comes to people who are believing conspiracy theories that are spread on online platforms. And so, what do you make of what happened yesterday?
I think it's absolutely fascinating. The first thing I thought of is there's this chart I came across in my research. It's a poster. It's called The Great Awakening. And I'll put a link to it on Twitter later so you can just stare at it. And what it is it's this chart someone made of 100, maybe 200 different conspiracy theories, from reptilians to people on Mars to the Vatican. And these are small fringe ideas that people have had for many, many years. But what QAnon does is it helps bring people together from across these different conspiracy theories, alternate beliefs, and links them together. So that's why yesterday, when I saw coverage in Vox and Rolling Stone of people gathering in Dallas to see the return of deceased President Kennedy, it was surprising, but also not surprising, because the JFK assassination has been a very prominent conspiracy theory since his death in the 1960s. And it's also worth noting that today QAnon isn't just manifesting these gatherings in the US. There's been coverage of the QAnon Queen of Canada handing out cease and desist orders against COVID vaccines and mask policies. There was a couple of people who gathered at Edinburgh Castle and said that they were taking it over. So one of the things that's really driving this is people who are looking for answers and are willing to grab onto these ideas that provide the answers they want.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say that's probably the key, right? Providing the answers that they want, that are in alignment with maybe their political leanings or how they think things should be, but may not be the reality. Because, let's take it back to January 6th. Thousands of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol. There was no evidence of any type of election fraud, and yet they called the election the Great Steal. They took over the Capitol. They killed some police officers. They assaulted other people. A woman who was a QAnon believer from San Diego, where I'm based, went there and got shot and killed in the chaos of everything happening. So it had real consequences, even though it was based on fiction. And so what's kind of been the fallout since January 6th? What did the experts that you talked to kind of consider the insurrection in terms of perhaps being a turning point in how we talk about QAnon as a country?
I think that QAnon was probably, or the January 6th storm was probably a wake-up call for a lot of people who saw this political group on the peripheral, said, what's that? Oh, that doesn't make sense to me. I'll move on. When you have people gathering together and acting, then suddenly, oh, well, maybe this group is dangerous, or maybe this group is powerful. Maybe we should be paying more attention to this. And what's interesting is that it's not just that people who believed in QAnon turned out to be the same people who went to storm the Capitol on January 6th. The moderator of the 8chan forum, Ron Watkins, also became a source in news coverage on OAN talking about allegations of election fraud. And so that link, it's not that people just jump from A to B. They were kind of guided down that path, and said, oh, you're angry, you don't like what's going on. Well, hey, why don't you go here and do this? And I know that Bianca also talked to Sam Hawkins, a courthouse news reporter who was in DC on January 6th. To be honest, I was sitting at my desk watching it unfold through the media throughout the day. So what did Sam say about what she saw?
Well, Sam, if you're Courthouse News' QAnon expert, she's the expert on the prosecutions of the people who face charges related to their actions on January 6th. She's been following pretty much every sentencing and court hearing that has been going on the past year. And she has learned some really interesting things, including that, it didn't necessarily serve as a lesson for them in terms of consequences related to their illegal actions. And that's because there are several January 6th defendants who have fired their public defenders. They are not following protocol in court. They're arguing with judges, and it's all based in this other conspiracy theory, which is called the sovereign citizen movement. And basically, they're claiming to not be citizens of the US, and so to not be subject to the laws of the land, including the charges that they face in federal court. And how do we deal with people who, not only didn't accept the election results for which there was no evidence of fraud, but now they're subject to charges in court because of their actions for not accepting those results, and they don't believe in our justice system. And so I think it's, to say it's befuddling is probably an understatement, especially for the judges and attorneys that are navigating these cases. And Sam Hawkins has had great coverage of this, and so I'd encourage listeners who are interested in following those cases to go to courthousenews.com and see her stories there, because she has multiple a week related to the charges.
I really see these people who are following QAnon, these people who are following sovereign citizens. I don't necessarily know that they're the problem so much as people trying to figure out how to solve their problems, symptoms of a disease. They're so disenfranchised, so politically isolated from our system. They watch candidates running and people going into office that they're just so that person does not represent who I am, does not represent the country I believe in. That there's also this underlying problem of trust and disenfranchisement, and that the political system is not fixing our problems. So it's not set up to guide people who don't want an attorney through the justice system. And what do you do with those people on the outside? How do you engage them in the political process or make a place where they don't have to? I don't know.
Well, you touched on that with some of the professors you talked to, right? Especially, I think Ethan Zuckerman pointed out on our podcast that aired last week, which for people just joining, you can find Courthouse News' podcast Sidebar on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. But Ethan Zuckerman talked about how, sure, there are QAnon believers and conspiracy theorists on both sides of the political aisle. But it's also probably accurate to say that the conspiracy theory has seeped into the Republican Party of 2021, especially considering that 70% of Republican members of Congress voted not to accept last year's election results. So how do we fact check people that are promoting a conspiracy theory and are, not kind of willing to face reality? What are the experts saying in terms of engaging with those people?
The experts are asking all the same questions we are. I have Ethan Zuckerman's book on my desk. It's called Mistrust: Why Losing Faith in Institutions Provides the Tools to Transform Them. And it's a very just fascinating look at how crumbling, if institutions are crumbling, how your mistrust can be harnessed to fix it, to rebuild it. I do want to talk about how do we do fair, accurate reporting when a chunk of sources aren't telling whole truths, when misinformation is being spread. You got to have good information. You got to come back with good sources, nuances. And one of the things I really love to come out over the last couple of years is annotating and fact checking political speeches so that you have the powerful, rhetorically driven speech. And then you have asterisks so you can see, oh, well, here's the actual statistics. Here's how it may or may not apply. One thing I think we've kind of struggled with our, or maybe I struggled with when reporting this story, is that 70% of Republicans voted not to accept the election. There's a couple of different surveys that say that. But misinformation is not purely a problem of one party. You have people on the left with GMO conspiracy theories. You have the idea that Bush caused 9/11, or even that Trump was colluding with Russia to get elected. These are, well, it's easy to find conspiracy theories being driven by the right. The device is used by anyone running for office who has something that they want to get people's attention. And the underlying issue in QAnon is they don't trust politicians. So I've really been struggling with how do we call out these bad actors while also leaving it open to build trust with people who don't necessarily want to be told, well, the solution is this other party. And conversations, encouraging research is also how people fall down QAnon. So it's a very complicated problem. And everyone I asked, I'm like, all right, do you have the silver bullet? And the answer is, well, this is what works for me. And if you find the answer, tell me.
Well, you talked to a reformed QAnon follower, Jatarth Jadeha, who runs an online forum for other reformed believers. So what led him, I guess you could talk about what got him into QAnon, but I think at this point it's more interesting to know what led him to question and abandon the conspiracy theory that he had bought into.
I was lucky enough to get to talk with Jadarth Jadeja. He's an Australian, and he came to the U.S. during university to study economics. And I always feel bad relaying someone else's story, but the story as he tells it is that he thought Bernie Sanders made a great case in 2016, saw Trump win, and he was so disillusioned that he said, okay, let me take a second glance at Trump. And Jatarth perceived unfair media coverage of Trump And he said, oh, okay, let me see what else has been spun, what else might be mistruth. And he ended up listening to Alec Jones and InfoWars and hearing messages that spoke to him. He spent year and a half, 2 years fully entrenched in that belief system until he came across, and this is also reported in Mike Rothschild's book, The Storm is Upon Us, this anecdote, that there was this Q post predicting that Trump would say tippy top in a speech. And these predictions, when they didn't come true, they were ignored. When Q's predictions came true, they were considered proof of the connection between Q and his access to Trump. So Q predicted that Trump would say tippy top in a speech. And when he said it, well, people believed it. And then Jatarth saw a video compiling all the times that Trump said tippy top. And it turns out to be a phrase that he commonly said. And that realization that, oh, maybe this was a coincidence, pulled him out. And today he moderates a Reddit forum for people who have come out of the QAnon belief. And the stories on there are really heartbreaking and relatable of people whose family members have fallen so deeply into the QAnon belief that they don't really care about anything else. And brothers, sisters, mothers, daughters who don't know how to connect to their family members anymore, don't know how to help them. And so it touches people on that very personal level as well.
And what kind of, that's interesting. It's like people fell into QAnon by wanting to, I think the expert I talked to, the disinformation expert I talked to, Brooke Binkowski, she called it a crowdsourced conspiracy theory. So these were people who, were skeptical of, the workings of our political system, of our economic system, and looking for alternative explanations to why things are the way they are. But then now they're crowdsourcing kind of advice through this reformed forum online on how to talk to family members. So what kind of advice is there to engage with loved ones who have fallen into this conspiracy theory and may seem unreachable at this point?
That's such an interesting thing to notice, that people fell into a crowdsourced conspiracy theory. Now they're crowdsourcing therapy. I mean, that shows that maybe the medium can do both good and evil. The first thing I want to talk about, there's one interview that did not make it into our podcast that I really enjoyed, and I encourage other people to check out. The Brainwashing of My Dad. The woman who made that documentary, Jen Senko, she documented her father's fall into Fox News and right-wing information and how it just altered his behavior. And I bring that up because at the end of the movie, one of the things she does is she started taking her elderly father off of email chains for conspiracy theories and harmful information to limit what was coming in front of him so that he wasn't constantly surrounded by that echo chamber. Now, I don't know that you should go and alter the email chains for everyone you're worried about. Absolutely not. But that was one extreme step that someone took. The two things that really stood out from people who have worked with cult survivors is empathy. Empathize first. Listen to what people are saying. Even if they say, hey, I'm going to go to Dallas in the morning because JFK is going to be resurrected. Okay, listen. Empathize that you are looking for answers and move from there. One thing that came from Jatarth is focus on behavior. That you need to understand, if people are entrenched in the belief system, that it clouds everything they see. So trying to argue on whether or not JFK is in Dallas might not get you anywhere, but how about you can't go to Dallas because you have to take care of your dog, you have work, you're supposed to help me with my yard. Like the very basic behavioral things of it's not your belief, but you're not being a good person to me right now. And to start to try to build your relationships with the people around you. If, yeah, that doesn't sound too hokey.
I think that sounds like tangible advice that maybe can help people bridge the divide, considering we all have yards and dogs and work and houses to take care of. And that's really, that's the lived reality of people in terms of moving through the world. And maybe if you don't mind if I articulate it this way, it's, Jadarth was suggesting that kind of, for lack of better words, bringing back people to reality, and they're focused on, something as obscure and abstract as bringing back JFK, but yet they have a dog who they need to take to the vet. And so maybe if people are more focused on those things, then you can have those more difficult conversations.
Totally.
We're kind of coming up on the half hour. So is there any takeaways that you want our listeners to mull over as they go and hopefully listen to our podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and you can check out Amanda's reporting, Samantha Hawkins' reporting at courthousenews.com. Amanda, is there anything you want people to take away?
How to condense it all in the last minute. I think the takeaway is that QAnon is not going to dissipate anytime soon, and there are similar movements full of people who are disenfranchised from the political system, who are looking for answers, and we're going to continue to be following them to also be looking for answers.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks for all your research. You truly are took the task of going down the rabbit hole, and Courthouse News is lucky to have you.
Aw, thanks, Bianca.
And please listen to our Sidebar podcast and check out Amanda's reporting at courthousenews.com.